Hi, I'm Nick.
And I'm Helena, and we both work at the MS Trust, a charity for people affected by MS in the UK.
We'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Multiple Sclerosis, Breaking It Down. And today we're going to carry on a bit from our last episode where we were looking at brain health. So we covered things like sleep, exercise, diet, and we get told from time to time that these things are really good for us. But like we discussed in the last episode, there's so much out there and it can be quite overwhelming just to start looking at changing, and you think like, wow, I've got to change my exercise regime, I've got to change the way I sleep. I'm dealing with MS anyway, so that's just another huge hurdle anyway. So we know that so many people have like really, really strong opinions on what you should be doing, what you should be eating, the way that you should be exercising. It could be really, really difficult to know where to start. You can imagine maybe trying to build a house, and you've got a lot of building blocks, but you don't know where to start. So maybe you might need something like a project planner to help you.
And I think in our community as well, you get a lot of people trying to sell ideas and methods, not always just for profit, but people are strong believers. Like you said, there's a lot of strong opinions. I've seen it many times where they say, if you sell your multiple sclerosis 3 times in a mirror, and someone will show up and say, have you tried yoga to cure it? And you can quite easily become quite cynical about these things because people like to, really kind of wax about these things and get really quite, almost preachy about it. I think when I was newly diagnosed, so many people started to tell me about cutting out this, that, and the other, and shouldn't I start exercising? And I the only running I wanted to do was probably running away from them to just hide because it was just a bit too much. And I do remember feeling quite ashamed about that. Maybe I lived an unhealthy life. I wasn't sure, maybe I should be exercising and eating better. And those feelings of shame, that just made me do nothing instead. It didn't sort of motivate me to do anything, change anything. So for some ideas on how to get started to think about making changes, but without feeling overwhelmed or shame, I spoke to Charlie Peel today, who has written a paper called Disease-Modifying Lifestyle in Multiple Sclerosis, Evidence, Challenges, and the Importance of Engaged, Informed Patients. So that might be confusing as a title, but it was very interesting, the idea of it. So we decided we wanted to chat to Charlie. So we're talking about what is a disease-modifying lifestyle, why it's important, and how to sort of get started.
Yeah, looking forward to that, Helena. And also I'll be talking to one of our colleagues here at the MS Trust, Stephen. So he's just started working in our fundraising team, and he's in charge of the popular challenge that some of you might have done before, Miles for MS. Stephen also has MS himself, and we'll be talking all about his own journey, taking part in Miles for MS, and how you can get involved too. So loads to get through today. You're probably sick of listening to Helena and I. So let's kick things off with our first interview with Charlie Peel, and let's find out just what a disease-modifying lifestyle is.
We hear a lot about making lifestyle changes in order to live better with MS, but this generally would be up to each and every person to sort of try and consider themselves. What about if we started viewing things like diet and exercise as a part of a well-being treatment, much like how we might take our medication? Today I'm here with Charlie Peel, who is a health writer from Neurology Academy, to talk a little bit about a paper she has written on called Disease-Modifying Lifestyle in MS. Welcome, Charlie.
Thanks for having me.
To start off, what would you say is disease-modifying lifestyle in MS? Because it's an interesting concept, I find.
Yeah, I like it as a phrase because we're so familiar with disease-modifying treatment as kind of the best possible way of treating MS. And I think for a long time we thought of lifestyle things like physical activity or sleep or how we manage stress as being sort of helpful management tools for certain symptoms. We haven't always understood or even kind of considered the fact that actually by making lifestyle changes, we can have an impact on our brain health, and therefore on how well we're managing cognitively, on our brain volume, which we know in MS can get smaller much more quickly. And also on things like the number of relapses that we have, or even our entire disease trajectory, which I don't really like that term, but essentially how our condition changes over time, how quickly it changes over time, how quickly it impacts the way that we are experiencing it. And I think lately there's been more research, but also a better ability to pull together all the different pieces of research into a clearer picture. So we now know that a lot of these lifestyle changes have a real meaningful impact on our brain health and on disease progression. And I can give you a couple of examples if you would like. So we know that stopping smoking immediately changes the rate of motor disability, so our movement, our mobility. There's evidence that regularly exercising or taking part in physical activity can impact your relapse rate. We know that your brain health and your brain volume can be maintained better through things like good quality sleep and exercise. And we know that we can also have a massive impact on what we call comorbidities, essentially other conditions that we can have alongside MS, whether that's obesity or diabetes and things like that. We know that when we have MS and one of those conditions, it has a really big impact on treatment outcomes, on progression, and on our quality of life. And we know that if we have a good lifestyle, then that immediately has an impact on our cardiovascular health, on our blood sugar levels, that kind of thing, which is then going to reduce the likelihood of getting one of those other conditions, and therefore have a better impact on the MS itself as well.
So it all kind of comes full circle, doesn't it?
It's like with anything. It's not like one thing that you do will change your MS, or one element of managing this will have an impact. It's always all the little things, and it's the same with this kind of idea of a disease modifying lifestyle. By making lots of different little changes that mount up over time, we can come at it from lots of different angles. So that brain health, that disease progression, that overall health, to create a much better picture of health in each individual.
So it's sort of more a holistic approach, isn't it, that people are talking about now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really lovely to see that the NICE guidance got updated last year, and that's included a lot of this stuff in what they call a yearly comprehensive review, which everyone should be having. And it is looking at sleep, it is looking at physical activity, it is looking at stress management, because it is very much the more we support people as a whole person with all the different things that may or may not be MS related, the better their experience of their MS is, and the better their quality of life is overall, which in turn then has a really big impact on how people experience their MS and their individual symptoms.
No, that makes sense. We recently did a live stream where we had a clinical psychologist on, and I was asking him, how would MS affect mood and things like that? And he sort of turned it on its head, on its head, the question, and sort of said, well, how does your mood affect your MS? And it kind of takes back to this, doesn't it? Again, it's not just one thing that is it's all stacking up and becoming things that might then affect symptoms and things like that. So there's a lot of little building stones that we need to get right in order to
There is, and I think that can be overwhelming in some ways, because it means there's not just one thing. But equally it can be really positive, because it means that there are a whole plethora of different one things that you can take on board that will have an impact. And I love sleep in the same way that mood gave as an example. We can improve our sleep in so many different ways. Our sleep can be deteriorated by lots of different symptoms, but if we get better sleep, that impacts those symptoms. We know those symptoms impact each other. So if you're thinking about mood and pain perception and fatigue, all of these things, they all interrelate. And so whilst it means that sort of one thing going a bit pear-shaped can have a knock-on, it also means one thing getting a bit better can have a knock-on. And I really like that kind of positive upward spiral approach that you can take with any of this stuff. Yeah.
I like the term of their positive upward spiral. It's like a positive domino effect rather than.
I think when you're managing any kind of long-term condition, it's really up and down. No matter how well you're controlling symptoms, no matter how well you're managing, it's always a bit like this, isn't it? And I think thinking of kind of, if I do this, it will immediately be better, or if I do this, it will be immediately worse. They're not very helpful, but actually it tends to be a slow downward curve or a slow upward curve on a daily basis, with the odd things that will ping you up or down. And I think if you can think about lifestyle change, because it's life, there's a lot of it, and we've got a long time to make these changes. If you can think of them as little things that slowly either increase that curve or decrease that curve, it can feel a bit more manageable. I'm quite visual. I like that idea of kind of just slowly upwards, and also it also helps you to see that if you get a bad run of insomnia, it's a bit of a slow downward, but it's not putting you at the bottom. It's that downward curve that then you can do other things to reverse, and I think maybe that's a more positive way of thinking about it too.
So how would this be implemented for people with MS, do you think then?
So it's really interesting, isn't it? Because we can often think as lifestyle as that individualistic, well, it's up to you, it's all on you. And I think that's really unhelpful, partly because our society feels entirely set up against positive lifestyle choices, really, in terms of, you know, the ease of accessing kind of less nutritious food, and the kind of movement towards lots more cars and stuff. It's harder to walk or cycle places. I think there's a lot of that. I also think there is a lot of information, which can also be misinformation. I think that there is a real need for there to be kind of a collaborative effort across all aspects of society. And if we're thinking about MS, that's the person living with MS, and it's their healthcare professionals, but it's also our policy providers. So we mentioned that NICE have put it into place that this needs to be talked about. It's also our governments to be making better choices across society. So there's loads of different levels. But I suppose just at a really basic level, if you're living with MS, there are things that you can do on a day-to-day basis. But if your symptoms aren't being well managed, that's going to make it a lot harder to make those lifestyle choices. So working with your healthcare professionals to get your symptoms under control, whether that's with medication or therapies or kind of a lovely combined approach, might give you the ability to then make those lifestyle changes more easily, which in turn might mean that later on you can come off those medications or reduce those medications. And again, that's not linear either. But we talk a lot now about something called supported self-management, which is essentially talking about this partnership approach across the person living with a condition and the healthcare professional. And it might mean access to medications, it might mean access to therapy, it might mean information and being signposted to trusted sources, it might mean social prescribing and being referred into services that aren't necessarily health services, but that you wouldn't perhaps be able to access if you weren't working in partnership with your healthcare professional. Equally, if you're someone that is incredibly motivated and loves to dive down rabbit holes of information, which is a bit like me, you might not need that much support from your healthcare professional. But I think it's really important to not put the onus of lifestyle change on any one individual, because even at that very low level, actually the way your household interacts and acts is going to have an impact. Your friendship groups and their choices will impact that. So I don't think you can see positive lifestyle changes as kind of a tiny blob that you have to take on board all on your own. I think it has lots of different levels, both personal, kind of alongside healthcare, and that systemic level as well.
Because like you said, it can sometimes, when you read things about brain health, and there's so many different things, like you know, your diet, your exercise, or supplements and all these things, it's just like, oh my goodness me, how am I going to be able to deal with all of this myself and like navigate those fields? So I guess reaching out to your MS nurse would be a good place to start then.
Yeah, I think so. I think MS nurses are incredible, aren't they? And they're so good at seeing a whole person. So when we talk about kind of comorbidities and managing your MS in conjunction with life stresses, you know, whether you've got young children or you're also in a caring capacity, they're really good at seeing all of that and putting it together. And I think they're also, I think it's the same with our allied healthcare professionals as well, speech and language and physio and OTs. They've talked about lifestyle maybe longer than has been popular. It's come to a fore, hasn't it, over the last few years? But I think these sorts of understanding that sleep is important, understanding that your physical activity, that your relationships will impact you, that's been understood, I think, by our nurses and our therapists for longer than has been sort of splashed about on the media and things. And I think they're really, really good at helping you to identify your own goals and what is going to make the biggest impact to you now. Because I think, as you say, there's so many things you can do, and there's so much information that it's just incredibly overwhelming if you are going from sort of not really doing much lifestyle wise to then viewing all this information. I think there's a tendency to just go, no, I can't do that. And just put it away. And so working with someone like your MS specialist nurse or healthcare coordinators, we have now health and wellbeing coordinators in a lot of primary care practices who can be really good at this, sort of just talking to you about what matters most. What's the thing that will add value to your life? And let's just work on that. So I know somebody who their mobility was, they were actively mobile. They didn't need walking aids very often, but they had got new grandchildren and they wanted to sit and play with their grandchildren. And they just didn't feel confident trying to get up and down off the floor. And that was their goal then, was to be able to move enough that they could get up and down off the floor. And on the one hand, that's like, oh, okay, well, physio exercises will let you do this. But because it was intrinsically tied to something that they valued, which was time with their grandchildren, they were able to do those physio exercises that half the time you get given and 2 weeks later you've sort of forgotten about. They kept at it, and they did other things as well, because it was all feeding into this, I guess, connectivity, relational goal. And I think it is finding that thing that matters to you, and then finding the few changes that will directly relate to that, and then making that part of life. And then when that's part of your life anyway, you know, if you've gotten to the point where you can sit on the floor, maybe then you go, okay, well, actually, I really feel dreadful in the mornings and my sleep's not very good. What could I do then? And then you take another small thing that you can add in, and it's incremental.
I really like that. I know a lot of personal trainers, they always talk about finding your why. And that is very much like your why is to sit on the floor and play with your grandchildren. And then that's a great motivator. I think there's been a little bit of a shift recently, which I really love. And in the same way as if we would compare, I don't know, I have a headache, so therefore I take a paracetamol. That's dealing with something that's going wrong at the moment. But I'm taking disease-modifying drugs to sort of try and prolong how well I am for the longevity of time. And I think maybe trying to look at things like diet and exercise, because a lot of people have always seen it a little bit like punishment, you know, oh, I have to eat healthier because I've put on weight, or I'm getting really unfit, so therefore I'm going to have to go to the gym. And as soon as you start to see it as like that enemy, that bad thing, then it's really hard to make it part of your daily life routine. But if you have something like, I want to be able to sit on the floor, I need to work on my physio to do this, then and then, like you say, make it part of your everyday routine. So maybe that's the first thing you do in the morning, you do your physio, and then you set you up for the day. I think that's, but it's hard to sort of get into that way of thinking at the start, isn't it?
Yeah, I heard a lovely thing. It was during COVID, actually, and it was I think it was on a podcast. People were talking about the difficulties of being home and all the things that we were having to do and juggle. And they were recommending a simple choice of words which can reframe things in your mind. And it was what you just said then, I have to go to the gym, I have to go out for a walk, I have to eat this, I have to not eat ice cream, which would be my personal, just that would be the end of the world if I couldn't eat ice cream. And they recommended changing it to I choose to, or I get to. So not I have to go for a walk, but I get to go for a walk. I can go for a walk. My body can go for a walk, and I might not get very far, but I can go for that bit of a walk, and I'm going to choose to do that. And just that reframing turns it from being the enemy that you're having to tackle into the thing that is enabling you to live well. And I think the more we learn about lifestyle and its links to health and longevity and things, for me, a lot of the time it feels like almost like depositing in a bank account. So at the moment, I do experience pain and fatigue and things, but they're reasonably under control. So I choose to do more walking and things, knowing that that is going to help my health for the times when I'm not doing as well. And I think it's that kind of choosing to make good choices now so that your quality of life for the foreseeable future is at a better level than it would otherwise be. And I think that's a nice way of looking at it as well. You're kind of almost investing in tomorrow.
I like that. It's like putting a deposit into your health bank.
Yeah, exactly that.
One thing that really stuck with me, I did a podcast I think it was a few years ago now, with someone who we were talking about mobility issues and somebody who's had to start using a wheelchair. And she used to be really active, and she always used to find, like, people would say, well, why would you want to go to the gym? Why would you want to do that? And then she said, these people who are able-bodied and been able to go to the gym, what a privilege it was for them to be able to do it when she couldn't do it. And I think that's maybe one thing that I try to, I like running, and I feel like having MS, it's a huge privilege for me to be able to do that. And once I actually start looking at it like that, especially when you're having a tough run or it's horrible, it's actually, well, no, this is a privilege for me to be able to do this, then it just feels like a more positive thing to do. So I think you're right there. A lot of it is kind of just about the choice of words, what you use for it.
Yeah. And also, it doesn't have to be an absolute, does it? Like I just said that no ice cream would be a deal breaker for me. I choose to eat healthily the majority of the time. But if I really fancy sitting down with a big bowl of ice cream, I'm not going to not do that, because ultimately, on balance, something that's less good for me, but is really good for my mood, is probably just as good, as long as I'm not, eating a pint every day. It's all right. And I think when you're talking about lifestyle, it is life. It's not the next week or the next month and then it stops. It has to be sustainable, and it has to be joyful at the end of the day. And so if you're eating a diet which feels punishing, then actually thinking about how to inject some flavor and some things that you love into that is going to be really essential. Otherwise, there's no way that you can maintain it. And equally, I think talking about nutrition, which can be just a ticking time bomb, can't it? Everyone feels so strongly, but just from a perspective of kind of preparing a meal from scratch, if you're trying to prepare quite a complex meal or something that takes sort of 25 minutes of preparation and you're struggling with fatigue, you're not going to make it. Whereas if you found a way to, I don't know, layer up 2 vegetables in the same steamer while bunging a piece of fish in an oven, and it took 3 minutes to do it, and then in 20 minutes it will be done, you're far more likely to be able to replicate that on a number of days, aren't you? So I think it's also about being really realistic and honest about your own kind of abilities and goals, and what will be the thing that will stop you from doing something, and what would be enablers, what is going to help you to do those more, like keeping that steamer on the side all the time, for example.
I think with food, especially just keeping it quite simple. I'm a big fan of batch cooking. I tend to do it sort of on a weekend, and then I just chop bits up, and then I have a big batch of, I don't know, couscous, and then I put random bits of things in that for my lunch, and it just takes 5 minutes to do it. And but yeah, like you say, because sometimes you read these things and you think, oh, it says eat the rainbow and I need to have this and I need to have that, and it gets very expensive and very complicated, but it doesn't need to be that every single meal, does it?
No, absolutely. And learning the foods that you like that are really easy is good. So for me, I like to make sure there is something green on our plate every meal. My children, they don't like things like kale and spinach, which I love, because you can boil a kettle, bung it on the leaves, and 2 minutes later you can eat it. But they will eat peas and broccoli. So those are really quick to cook as well. And if we just always have some frozen peas and a floret of broccoli in the fridge, then that's 10 minutes and you've got an extra veg there as well. So it's finding the things that work for you and your household. And then just finding ways to make them a bit more interesting, really, of what you put with them and stuff, isn't it?
It really is, like, one size doesn't fit all, when is it? And I think that's why it can be tricky. But it also, you just have to experiment a bit and see where you end up, don't you?
I think so, yeah. And to not not try and do too much all at once. Again, I think food can just feel insurmountable, can't it? And if you haven't got a huge budget and you haven't got much time and you haven't got much energy, it can feel like actually just bunging in a microwave meal or a frozen dinner or something is going to be the easiest. So learning the vegetables that are cheap and cook quickly, learning how to make, one pot of, I don't know, risotto or paella, or something that just all goes in a pan and then you just leave it. It's learning the things that you enjoy eating that are also going to be as easy as that bunging the microwave meal in, so that it doesn't feel like you're having to constantly battle with your own mind about which one you're going to do.
Let's talk about the big, I was going to say the F word, not a rude word, but fatigue.
Yes.
That's obviously something that's huge, stopping you from a lot of these things. I mean, cooking and exercise and how, if you are struggling with fatigue, because I think one of the things is exercise, we read a lot of things about, if you exercise, your fatigue will get better. But you go out and exercise and then you come home and you feel really tired, especially if you haven't done any exercise in the past. How can we sort of go at this with some strategies in order for fatigue actually to be able to improve?
I think that's such a good question. And I think it can be really disheartening, actually, if you're struggling with fatigue, which we know is physical and emotional, isn't it? So it can be hard enough to say, right, I'm just going to make myself do this thing. And then your body's saying, I don't want to do it. And you're trying to do it anyway. And then afterwards, you're exhausted. But then actually, maybe it drops you backwards for a couple of weeks as well. And that was my experience in trying to, I'm a researcher, I was reading all this stuff about how exercise is the way to best manage fatigue. And every time I tried, I was being almost kind of laid low for 2-3 weeks afterwards. And I was getting so frustrated because why was the research showing this for everyone else and not for me? And I learned the hard way for myself, and it will be different for every person, but I learned that I needed to build up really, really, really slowly. So you read exercise is good for fatigue and you think, right, that means something like a really brisk walk for a decent amount of time, or going to the gym, or you think high level of physical exertion, don't you?
Yeah.
And actually, I think the word exercise is really unhelpful, because if you are struggling with fatigue or mobility or just general impetus to want to do something, exercise doesn't feel tangible, it doesn't feel manageable. But there's also physical activity, which is a lovely word, which encompasses everything from, standing on one leg at a traffic light to try and manage some balance, all the way through to dancing in the kitchen with your kids in the evening. And then movement, which is one of my favorite words, which just implies trying to use your body more, bending down to pick something up, or maybe trying to carry your groceries a little bit further or something. And again, all of these are tailorable to your own functional ability and your own preferences. But I think for me, thinking about fatigue and exercise, we just need to broaden that out a lot more to fatigue and movement and physical activity, and just doing a little bit of something. And that something might look different for every person when they're starting. I interviewed a lovely lady called Joanne the other week with MS, and she does this thing called Walk a Happy Mile. And there's a YouTube video of it. And she does it regularly, but she does it in her lounge because she doesn't feel confident going out and her balance is bad. So she does it holding on to something. And at the moment, she doesn't do the whole mile. She can't manage the mile. It's too fatiguing for her. But she does as much of it as she can on that given day. And she keeps coming back to it. And her goal, sorry, that's my dog coughing. And her goal is to be able to complete the whole mile on a good day, knowing that actually that might be on a Tuesday she completes it one day, and then by the Friday she doesn't complete it again. And so I think it's picking something that you enjoy, so that even if you only manage a bit, you're still benefiting from it mood wise. Picking something that it doesn't matter how much of it you manage. So maybe one day you walk 5 meters, maybe another day you go for 20 minutes, maybe one day you can walk briskly for an hour. But if you enjoy walking outside in the sunshine, it doesn't matter which one of those things it is. I think it's listening to your body. And if you're starting to experience more fatigue as the movement is going on rather than less, it might be time to go home again. And I think also just taking time and being okay with it, not, you know, you're not going to move better for 2 days and then your fatigue is under control. I think it's taken me 3 years of just slowly bringing in more and more movement and physical activity. And now I would say exercise as well, but it's been a building up process. And 3 years now, I can say that I feel that most of the time I manage my fatigue with movement. But it isn't do this now and then it's better. And I think sometimes if you're comparing fatigue to medication, and even though we know studies have shown that actually the efficacy of the medication, when you compare it to studies that show efficacy of exercise, it's much lower. But you maybe think you take that piece of medicine and if it sits well with you, you do feel an impact quite quickly. Whereas when we're talking about something like exercise or physical activity, it's much more that long game. And I think there's no reason why you can't do both, why you can't take some medication to help manage your fatigue, to give you enough energy that you can start to do some exercise or some activity. And then maybe over time, the weighting of those changes, maybe it's more exercise than medication, or maybe you can take away that medication eventually. But it doesn't have to be one or the other. And it doesn't have to be the same thing for everyone. And it definitely doesn't have to be the same thing every day, I would say.
And I think it's really important what you were saying, that it does take time, because I think, you know, if you go on, I don't know, Instagram and you scroll through feeds and you look at some of these people that like to hashtag them with MS Warrior, you know, they're doing this and they're climbing this, and you kind of feel like, wow, why can't I do that? Because this is never going to be me. But I mean, I used to be a total couch potato. I was, you know, pre-diagnosis, just sat and watched TV was my favorite pastime. I just did not do anything like that. And it was a friend of mine that wanted to do a couch to 5K. I'd never run. I was just like almost laughing at her. And then that, just like the idea of running for 30 seconds was really horrible. But I think by the end of the program, where we actually were jogging and doing things, that's when I suddenly realized, hang on a second, I have much more energy. But I mean, that's a good sort of 3 months worth of doing it before I actually noticed anything. And it was just like a happy side byproduct that I hadn't expected it, because I was fully sure that once I've completed that 5K, I wasn't going to run anymore. That was going to be it. But I'm still doing it just purely because that worked. And that, bringing back to what you were saying, is like, for me, feeling like I'm investing into my future. And now it's become longer than 5Ks, and I'm still really enjoying it most days. But some days it's really, really hard, and then you have to go back and sit on the sofa for a bit instead, and that's okay.
And I think it's also okay that some days you don't really want to. Some days you wake up and you're like, oh, I don't really feel like this. And I think that's when that realization that when you do it, you feel better kicks in. For me, the only time I have in my day to go for a decent walk is at 7 o'clock in the morning, before my kids are really kind of excited to be doing things. And getting out of bed at that time, if you have had a bad night's sleep or if your fatigue is high, it feels almost insurmountable. But I always know that no matter how hard it is, not going will make the rest of the day that much harder. Whereas if I can push myself through that really hard bit, by the time I come back from my walk, I feel like a better version of myself. I'm a better parent. I work better when I'm working. And it is that kind of, sometimes you do have to have a little battle with yourself. And it helps to have had some good experiences in order to have that battle, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that's finding that level of pushing, but not pushing too much. It's really tricky, and it probably takes a good few years before you kind of get to know your body well enough when it comes to things like movement. Because I'm very much like that. If I don't do some sort of exercise in the morning, and then that could be just stretching on some days, you know, it doesn't always have to be sort of something that's really like a run or lifting stuff. But if I don't do anything, I tend to just want to sit the rest of the day, and my fatigue is so bad by the time of lunch, I want to sleep, you know, and so I try to kind of think about that when I'm laying there in bed going, I don't want to get up, and I'm like, well, then I'm going to just stay like this the whole day, and I actually have stuff to get on with. So, but it's hard to find that motivation. What do you think about I see this quite a lot of people sort of, we a lot of people post online, and there's exercise journals and things like that about keeping accountable, because one story that I loved, and it made me think of it when you were saying about the lady who was walking in her house. We had a lady a few years back who took part in our Miles for MS challenge, and her thing was that she took her walker and she walked up and down the aisle of her local supermarket because it was nice and smooth. She wasn't worried about falling over. She went at a time when it wasn't so busy. And she was doing this every day during the month. And towards the end, the staff came and they had like a finish line, and it was lovely. It was really nice. But I think because she always used to go and put a little post in our Facebook groups, today I walked this, today I did that, and she got lots of encouragement from other people. She felt that was sort of keeping her accountable for what she was doing. I do a little bit the same. I sort of use my Instagram as a journal where I put down what I've done, and it feels like on those days when I really don't want to do it, I'm still like, well, I want to put something in there to keep myself accountable. But I try to be honest on the days where it's like really rubbish as well. Do you think that can sort of motivate people as well?
I think it really depends on the type of person you are. Yeah. And I don't know if you've heard of Gretchen Rubens. She's a research writer, and she wrote a book a while ago called The 4 Tendencies, which is sort of a personality type test. But it looks at what you're more likely to be motivated by. Yeah. And I think I personally am not that motivated by accountability. Yeah. But I know that there are times when it does help. Yeah. But I have a friend who really wanted to improve her physical health. Yeah. And she loves walking, but she just couldn't bring herself to go regularly. And so we made an agreement that 3 mornings a week we would meet. We live reasonably close together, and we would meet at a kind of a 5-minute walking distance from each of us, and we would go for a walk together. And I thought that it was much more for her, this kind of level of accountability, because we knew it's early in the morning. We meet at 7, which means you can't decide and phone and say, actually, I don't really want to come, because no one's awake. You're literally getting out of bed, pulling on your trousers and going. Yeah. And so for her, it was really helpful because it was making her go. But actually, I'm learning, because we've now been doing it for over a year and a half. I'm learning it's actually really important for me, because if I'm in a patch of time where either my mood is lower or my pain is higher, I will still go for a walk. I know I will, but it might be a shorter walk, and it might be a bit later in the day, so I'm not getting that early morning light to help with my sleep and all that kind of thing. But it makes me go and do the whole hour of walking. And sometimes we walk very slowly and sometimes we walk faster. Yeah. But I'm noticing that even for me, who doesn't think accountability is helpful, actually, it really is at the times when you just don't feel like doing it. And I know social media can be really helpful for some people. I don't use it personally. I don't find it good for my mental health. But I think whatever level of checking in you need is a good thing. And I also think there's something about social connection. We know how important social connection is anyway. Yeah. But if you can sort of, I'd call it stacking. It's not my own phrase. It's coined by Katie Bowman. She's a biomechanist and I love her. But she talks about stacking your life so that you're more likely to do something. And if you can stack, for example, your exercise with getting sunlight in the morning to help your sleep, with seeing a friend, so you're getting that social connection, you're doing 3 things in that 1 20-minute period, and it's going to make you more likely to keep doing say it is a walk or a run. It's going to make you more likely to do that if you're also getting a mood boost from the time spent with a friend, and getting a boost in your sleep from the time spent outdoors. And so it kind of can be accumulative, I think. So I think accountability is good, possibly as a motivator, but also because maybe through that accountability you're probably adding a level of social connection, which is also helping your quality of life feel better.
That makes a lot of sense. I do think what you were saying about walking together with someone, I used to have a friend who I used to walk with a lot, and I really miss those walks just because you put the world to rights when you're walking. I don't know, there's something about those endorphins flying, and then you get talking, and then once you come home you just felt really kind of like That was a good.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So your paper is all about the sort of the importance of engaged patient for this to work. How can we help people to feel engaged in disease-modifying lifestyle change without shaming them for current habits and choices? I mean, this is a tricky one, isn't it? Because again, especially if you haven't been looking into these things, and it's like, well, smoking is a good example. My mum used to be a big smoker. If she went to any doctor, the first thing that they would say would be, stop smoking. And she would just stop going to see the doctor, because she was just so worried about being shamed. So if she had a backache, she wouldn't go because she was just didn't want them to bring up the smoking issues. So I feel like we want to motivate people to do this, but how can we do it in a way that isn't shaming? Because I don't know. I don't think, we were talking about accountability. I don't think shaming will ever work as a way to to get people to stick to a healthy lifestyle.
No. And actually, I think shame as an emotion is an incredibly unhelpful and quite toxic emotion, and it should never be a motivator ever. I think a lot of what we've already said today is kind of relevant here. I think noticing that our society kind of sets us up for a fail lifestyle wise a lot of the time is important to know. I think remembering that it's not okay to expect someone to do this on their own and in isolation is really important. I think it's important to remember that the people around you and the lifestyle choices they make will have a big impact on your choices, and that actually sometimes it can be almost impossible to feel like you can make a choice in a different direction if all of your family or all of your friends are making that choice. And I think smoking's a really good example. Not that necessarily people choose to smoke to fit in, but I think if you are from a kind of a social group where it's just so normal and it's synonymous with maybe social connection or having a nice time or going out and letting your hair down or whatever, then you're not just asking someone to stop a habit which is unhealthy, you're asking them to sever the connection that has with all of those good feelings around connectivity and belonging. So I think it's so important to see all of this in so much more of a well-rounded way than just one thing in isolation. I think that having healthcare professionals supporting self-management can be good here, because you can have that conversation of what's most important to you, but you could also have what would be easiest. Because we've talked about values, and it's so important to do something that is values-based, but sometimes you just need a quick win. And if something that would be really easy for you to do is to drink some more water, and you're a bit competitive, maybe get one of those bottles with the lines on the side so that you know that you're drinking that much. Or maybe you like something beautiful and you could buy a really lovely glass. And you say, I'm going to use this glass and that will make me drink more water. And I think noticing a little thing and realizing that has had an impact positively on your lifestyle, it encourages you to want to make another one. It's not to say any of your less positive lifestyle choices are bad, are wrong, you shouldn't be doing them. It's saying, well, what can we change that does feel comfortable for you? What can we change that would be meaningful for you or would be helpful for you? And actually, I think that it is that positive upward spiral again. If you notice that when you get sunlight in the morning, you take your cup of tea outside in the garden, you don't want to go for a walk, you don't want to do any of this kind of exercise or food rubbish, but you'll stand in the garden for your cup of tea. You notice that helps your sleep. And by your sleep being better, you notice your mood is a bit lifted. So you kind of want to go out a little bit more. Your fatigue is a little bit lower. So actually you can park a little bit further away from the cafe where you're meeting a friend, and you can walk a bit further. You just notice it's making a few small incremental changes in other areas of your life, which isn't necessarily saying, I'm going to eat this way or I'm going to move this much every week. You're not necessarily choosing to identify as someone that you're not, but you're making these little changes that don't feel at odds with who you are or how you want to live, which are starting to have a benefit, and that might slowly change your mind about some of the other things that you always thought weren't things you wanted to change. And if that never happens, I think that's okay as well, because any one change is helping. Any one thing that you do is making a difference, whether that's journaling to help with your emotional management, or making a quick to-do list before you go to bed so that your brain isn't churning all night, or I don't know, switching one item of processed food for something that is similar but doesn't have as much kind of sugar or salt in it. It's the little things, I think, and they do add up. And I think if you can start to enjoy one or two little things, however small they are, not because you think that how you were living before was wrong, but because you're wanting how you live tomorrow to be better, it slowly can turn things around.
Can I ask you, when you were writing the paper, was there anything that sort of surprised you, or that you weren't expecting to find out when you were doing the research around it?
I think one of the, so I've been a bit of a boffin around sleep for a while, and I love how good sleep is. I think one of the things in the kind of area, the research on sleep that I did that surprised me was around autophagy and its link to health. So autophagy is, my children affectionately call it the brain's toilet flush. It's not just your brain, it's your central nervous system. It's the act of getting rid of toxins and things in your cells, but a lot of it happens in your brain and your central nervous system. And when you sleep in a really good deep sleep, your brain kind of shrinks down a little bit to make space around the outside, and your body sort of flushes all of the yuck out of your brain, out of your central nervous system. And if you don't get good quality sleep, then the amount of time available for autophagy goes down. And some of those toxins that build up are linked to things like Alzheimer's. So it's those kind of tau plaques and things. So we really want this to happen. But what I didn't realize is that there are some studies that are looking at how we can push the body into autophagy as a treatment form for neurodegenerative diseases of all kinds. So it's really early ideas, but I think it just shows the power of a good night's sleep. If we're thinking about a function of sleep as a possible treatment for things like MS and Parkinson's, that was really interesting to me. And the other one that surprised me, I didn't really want to find out about, but you can't unknow what you know, was around alcohol. So there's not much research into alcohol and MS, but there is a growing amount of research into alcohol and its effect on the body and brain generally. And one of the pieces of evidence that does translate across to MS is that drinking alcohol, and unfortunately it's not even excessive drinking of alcohol, which is sad because I like a glass of wine, but alcoholic intake has an impact on brain volume. So how much of your brain cells you keep for how long. And so one of the things that I did put in the paper is that whilst this isn't, it's not conducive that if you drink alcohol and you have MS, that's going to increase your disease progression. Of course, that can't be said, and there's no evidence of that. But what we can say is that when we have MS, our brain volume reduces more quickly than in other people. But when we drink alcohol, our brain volume reduces more quickly than in people who don't drink. And so if you put these together, it suggests that that is going to speed up that process potentially of brain volume reduction, and that therefore, where possible, maybe don't drink so much. Or if you don't really like it that much, maybe think about just cutting it all together. Again, it depends. If having a drink is really meaningful to you and helps your mood and your social connection and stuff, it's not reasonable to say you should quit alcohol. But just being aware of the information and making choices around, okay, well, how much am I okay to drink then? How often do I want to drink? Do I even care about drinking? Just having those conversations with yourself once you know this sort of information, I think is valuable. I suspect there will be more research coming out around alcohol in the same way that it has around smoking. I think the MS register will be a good place to find information about that. A lot of the evidence we have around MS and smoking came out through the MS register. Really encourage people who have MS to sign up for that. It's a brilliant way of contributing to research that isn't too it's not too impactful on your life.
We're going to be talking to the MS register about smoking and MS in a future podcast, actually, because we enjoyed reading what was come out of their And yes, obviously go and sign up to the MS Register. It's a great organization. I come from Sweden, and they already have sort of a big register for people that have MS. You end up in a register straight away there, and it's just the way that you can sort of look at things like this makes it so much easier. So, but because we don't get signed up automatically in the UK, I think organizations such as the MS Register are really important for this type of research to be done, isn't it? So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that epidemiological studies, so studies that are just looking at, I say just, that are looking at people over time, have their flaws because you can't account for all the different factors that are affecting things. But I think they are so important for just looking at those big pictures, picking up on threads, and then being able to kind of target where you dive in research wise into different things. So yeah, really, really meaningful.
Looking at your paper and sort of what we've been talking about today, for my final question, if there was just one thing that you should start by looking at, what would be your tip? I mean, obviously it would be different from person to person, but the overall thing, what would be your main tip for people to start looking at?
It's a really lovely question. And like you say, it's so individual, isn't it? And actually none of the areas of lifestyle change happen in isolation either. So more physical activity improves your sleep, for example. Your nutrition will affect how well you can move. It all kind of interrelates anyway. I would say that probably one of the least focused on ones, which I think is becoming increasingly important, is that of relationships and social connection, which I didn't really cover in the paper actually, but always keep in mind that actually the relationships you have actually have a huge impact on all these other things. But for me personally, sleep is that's the big one, because for my own experience, sorting out my sleep, which took just years to do, had the biggest impact overall on my ability to then do other things. So if you can address sleep quality, and there's lots of information out there. There's great charities like the Sleep Charity. There's loads and loads of fantastic podcasts. You might have done one yourself, but there's some great ones on Dr. Rangan Chatterjee's channel, Feel Better, Live More, and the Model Health Show. There's like about 8 kind of in-depth podcasts there. But a bit like with lifestyle, with sleep, there's loads and loads of things you can do. So you can start with just 1 or 2 things to slowly tweak the quality of your sleep. But one improved night's sleep can have a huge impact on your mood, your cognition, your fatigue, your pain, to the point where if you sleep deprive perfectly healthy adults, within about 3 days, they will start to experience cognitive fog, pain, fatigue, mood disruption. And so to address or to help manage common symptoms in MS, getting a good night's sleep might be a way of alleviating an awful lot of those, or reducing their severity, which then in turn might give you the space, the mental space, the emotional space, to think that you can manage other things like getting a bit more movement, or like changing your diet a little bit. I think it makes a big difference in how you interact with people, you know, your level of irritability, your level of compassion with yourself. I think if you've had poor sleep, you're just not patient with anyone, including yourself, and you just get frustrated and ratty. It's harder to accept where you're at, all these things. And whilst that might seem like a bit of a distant thing for people who are experiencing insomnia, or for whom kind of bladder issues are getting you up constantly, but there are always so many things you can do to just improve the quality of sleep for however long you're getting it. There's a great, I did an interview with Dr. Agnes Straukian on her Be Well with MS podcast, actually, which is specifically around sleep and MS. So I would send people over there as well if that's one that they're willing to look at. But
we can link to that in the show note as well. Agnes has been a guest on the podcast, and she's great. So
I think that we address a lot of the reasons why sleep can be hard to obtain if you have MS, and a little bit more about the science of why it's so important. But for me, sleep is the one that, if mastered, could give you a gateway into making lots of other changes more easily.
Fantastic. Well, I'm hoping people have gotten some ideas from listening to this, and I certainly know that sleep is something I need to try to sort out, because I quite often you end up relying on coffee and some sugary snacks when you are feeling tired, and that's that's not good, is it?
Well, you have to do what you need to do on a day-to-day basis, and caffeine is definitely one of my best friends too. But any way that we can improve our resilience during the day through sleep is a good thing to do, isn't it?
Thank you so much, Holly. It's been very, very, very interesting. And I will link to all the bits that you talked about in the show notes, so people can do some more research. And thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely chatting to you.
Now, if this was a commercial podcast, here is where there would be an advert. But we're a charity, so we don't do that. So instead, we'd like to take this opportunity to tell you about our fantastic resources for people with MS.
Yeah, so you can head to our website, that's mstrust.org.uk, where you can find loads of really, really helpful information and resources for anyone affected by MS. So do head over to that website and hit the MS Information and Support tab. And on there, there's a section dedicated to health and well-being. So you can find out lots more information about some of the things that we're talking about today, and lots of other really helpful information too.
And now let's have a listen to Stephen's story.
Hi, welcome back. And we're joined by Stephen now. He's part of our fundraising team. Hey, Stephen.
Hello. How are we doing?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, very good, mate. All the better for seeing you.
Yeah, absolutely. Feelings mutual. But for our listeners, could you introduce yourself? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Stephen. I'm part of the fundraising team here at the MS Trust. I've got MS myself. I was diagnosed in 2019, and I've been involved with a couple of fundraisers in the past myself. And I suppose, just felt like the right time to join the team and do it on a proper full-time basis, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I know we're all absolutely thrilled to have you, and brilliant that you've joined the team. And so you said you've been involved with a few fundraisers.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about Mars for MS that you're now involved with?
Yeah, so Mars for MS is designed to be a sort of inclusive fundraising event where anyone in the community or affected by MS can get involved. The emphasis is around inclusivity, so it's all about your distance, your way, trying to make it as accessible as humanly possible. As we all know, people with MS, like myself, will have varying abilities in terms of what they can physically manage in a day, bearing in mind physical disability or fatigue. So there's no sort of particular challenges. You set your challenge based on, how you are feeling and what you feel that you are capable of. Either way, it's all going to be contributing, and it's all going to be part of this amazing cause. One of the great things about it is that it's a real community-led event. So Mars for MS attendees seem to really get involved and really support each other throughout the process, which is one of the reasons that I really loved it as an event. There's a real sort of community feel about it. Everyone sort of bigging each other up and egging each other on. It was great. So whatever you decide to do is your challenge. You do it your way, your distance, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and I love that. I love how accessible it is, because you see a lot of challenges out there, don't you? Sort of exercise challenges, or really sort of extreme things that people are doing, running X amount of marathons and this stuff. And actually,
yeah, exactly.
For a lot of people, it needs to be
it's all
much
well
more
and good.
inclusive. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. I mean, I used to be a runner myself. I've done half marathons for charity in the past. I'm physically not able to do that anymore. I'm working my way back there, but I know I physically couldn't manage that because my fatigue and my nerve pain would just be too much. So as much as I would love to get involved in that, I know I physically am not capable at my current circumstances. But the emphasis of this year in particular is doing 30 days of whatever you set yourself as a challenge over the 30 days of June to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the MS Trust, 30 years of supporting people living with MS. That's the whole point of this year.
Yeah, amazing. And you said you've done it before, have you, Mars, for MS? Not organising it, but taking
No, not
part.
organising it.
That's
But
that's the first
yeah,
time.
yeah, it's interesting seeing it from the other side, and I was involved in 2021. So myself and other people that I knew within the MS community persuaded me to get involved, and we all decided to do one big day of getting involved with Mars for MS. So I think collectively between our youth organisation, we walked like 2 million steps in the one day. I personally did. What did I do? 36,000 steps in one day. So we basically went on a hike, me and my partner and the dog went hiking through the hills of Yorkshire for the day. It took about 9 or 10 hours. It was a bit grueling. I was absolutely battered, but it was so worth it and I loved it. And just everyone sharing their photos and their experiences and keeping each other motivating, keeping going was just phenomenal. I loved it. And I've never felt so tapped into the community before, which is one of the reasons I was so excited to get involved with it on the other side.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds like an amazing challenge, and yeah, it must be so good everyone coming together in that way. And as part of that group, I'm intrigued. Were they all people living with MS themselves?
Yeah, that's how we all met. It was just a group of young people through Facebook who had all met through their unified vision of how all of us had MS. So I think we would joke that it was the best worst club to be part of. It's like the circumstances that brought us together wasn't great, but we were so happy that we'd found each other. And I've made friends for life through the MS community. That has completely changed my life. Some of the people that I've met along the way, and some of them are among my best friends now. So yeah, no regrets there.
Yeah, I can imagine if you have those shared lived experiences, that can be really powerful to make those connections with people. I can imagine that for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And thinking about this year for Mars for MS, have you got anything in mind that you're doing personally at all?
Yeah, so I'm going to get involved, put my money where my mouth is. So I will be doing the challenge as well. So as I mentioned before, I used to be very active, but since my diagnosis, it's been a bit of a struggle. Over the past year in particular, I've mostly been using a walking aid, but I've progressively through physio and sort of like nerve pain relief, been able to use that less and less. So I've been sort of working my way back up fitness wise. So I'm going to try and do 10,000 steps every day. So I've just got myself a new pedometer, and I'm going to be looking to do 300,000 steps over the course of over the month. So we'll see how that goes.
Amazing, and no doubt that you'll be doing lots of work behind the scenes as well. I can imagine it's no
busy.
small task, is it? So yeah, brilliant stuff. And of course, you've also got a very young child as well that we congratulated.
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, she's 6 weeks old now, so lots of walking around with her on my chest and sort of dancing around in the living room side to side. So maybe that'll help me get my steps in.
Yeah, definitely. You have to pop some pictures online, and yeah, we can all enjoy
Absolutely.
Those. Yeah.
9 times out of 10, it'll be me just with the baby hanging off my chest. Guaranteed.
Yeah, and huge congratulations again. But
Thank you so much.
For anyone listening to this who thinks, oh, do you know what? Actually, not too sure about Mars for MS. What would you say? Well, why should people get involved with it?
I mean, why not? It's one of those where, like, certainly from a personal perspective, MS can be such an isolating condition at the best of times. And I think over the last few years, we've all learned how detrimental isolation can be to not only mental but physical health. And I think an event like this, where it's really community led and you really feel in touch with other people who are in similar circumstances to you and understand what you're going through, it can make more of a difference than I could possibly put into words. Just to feel like you've got other people going through the same thing that you are, who understand and who've got your back. and I've never encountered anyone in the community who has behaved otherwise. There's some truly amazing people in the MS community, and I encourage anyone who is feeling isolated or alone to get involved with something that is going to push them into the MS community and to interact with other people with the condition. There are some incredible people out there, and maybe you'll find your next best friend. And obviously the funds raised through this event is directly going towards helping people living with MS, through the MS services, through training MS nurses. I myself have lived in areas where there was a severe lack of MS nurses. I know what impact that can have on someone with MS. So your efforts could literally go towards helping you and people like you directly.
Yeah, amazing. I love that community feel, that bringing people together about the challenge as well. It sounds great. And yeah, as you say, that isolation is so difficult, isn't it? And actually, if there's a way that you
100%.
can interact with that community, just knowing that community is there together, that's so powerful. But what I
Absolutely.
was just wondering if you had some kind of ideas for anyone listening who would like to get involved, for some sort of ideas for the different challenges that they could do.
Absolutely. I mean, again, trying to be aware of everyone's different mobility levels, whether you are walking, if you're in a wheelchair, it doesn't matter. Just go at your pace, your distance, even if it's just doing a couple of laps around your garden. We saw plenty of people doing that kind of thing during the pandemic. It's absolutely valid. Whatever you do, whatever you can contribute is valid. Walking your dog, taking your kids to school, maybe doing some physio or an aerobics class at home, because that's something that is already important for your physical health. Even if it's just trying to get into a rhythm of getting into some lifestyle changes that are going to be helpful for you in the long term. I know personally that's why I'm setting myself this challenge, is I want to get back into that sort of frame. I know that it's hard, and overcoming those barriers of pain and fatigue can be really difficult sometimes, but I also know when I do go out and do it, I feel so much better for it more often than not. So it's about sort of combating those mental barriers. But there's so many things you could do, whether that's cycling, aerobics, whatever feels right to you, honestly. It will be valid and it will be accepted and celebrated within the community. I promise you that.
Yeah, brilliant. I love how open-ended you can go with this one. It really is for everyone. Yeah. And it's not just people living with MS who can get involved as well.
No, anyone who's affected by it, family members. We have plenty of people signing up who are doing it in either in memory of someone or in support of someone that they love. So we've seen some incredible challenges out there. I know there's one person who's planning to do 100,000 kilometers. They're an ultra marathon runner. I think their sister has MS, and I was dumbfounded to read that, and to read their story was incredible. There's so many incredible stories. We have a Facebook group as well, which if you're intending to join, you can join our Facebook group, and there's loads of stories and challenges and ideas being shared there. But obviously the resources that we can share as well on our website, which you can probably see just above me there. There's loads of ideas there as well. But feel free to get in touch, and we will help you and support you in any way we can.
Brilliant. Yeah. And is that the best way to get involved, would you say, to jump on the website or the Facebook groups and find us that way?
Absolutely. Yeah, the website, and the Facebook group are absolutely the best resources.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. I think it's got me thinking about what I'm going to try and do for Miles for MS this year. So definitely, I know
I look forward to hearing your plans, Nick.
Yeah. Yeah, don't sign me up for anything too mad, but I can't do the ultra marathons. So I'm not quite sure I'd be up to that level anytime soon. But is there anything else just before we go? Is there anything you'd like to say just to those who are thinking about getting involved?
I'd say, what have you got to lose? It's one of those, give it a try, see how you get on. Even if you don't feel like, you're in a position where you know what your limitations are and you know what challenge to set yourself, start slow. You've got a whole month to feel it out and see how you're doing. So it could really be a game changer. It certainly was for me. I found it to be quite a life-changing experience, not to overestimate it. And I hope that it can be the same for other people. But honestly, give it a go. There's so many amazing people out there with MS and affected by MS there to support you. And they're just waiting out there, and we'll be with you the whole way. So we'd love to see you get involved.
Amazing. You heard it here. It's life-changing. Master MS. Yeah, how can you not get involved now, right?
All right.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Stephen. We'll leave you to go and get
You're
on. I know
welcome,
you've got lots to do for the event, and
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and wishing everyone
Thanks for having me.
best of luck.
Take care, everyone. Look after yourselves.
And there we go. We are back.
Brilliant. I have to say it was very interesting listening to both of them. I really enjoyed talking to Charlie. I felt like, and especially coming off after the last podcast where Agne gave us so much information. It was a little bit what you were saying before about, getting lots of building stones, but how do we start to build this? I don't know, I was going to say a healthy house. I don't. and I feel like to that level of actually thinking, okay, I'm going to pick one thing. I like the lady that she mentioned who wanted to, play with her kids. She wanted to, that, or her grandchildren. That was sort of, I think it's about finding that why, one thing that can motivate you to make it a part of your life, rather than, every January, everyone is just trying to get you to change everything. You're supposed to stop drinking. You're supposed to lose all the Christmas weight, and you're supposed to take up, I don't know, running and after a week in, so many people just go, no, I can't do it. It's just too much. You really have to sort of, I don't know, set realistic expectations on these things, I think.
That's the kind of yo-yo thing, isn't it? And I know I've certainly done that before in my life as well. It's like you try and start some of these habits, and you only get so far, then you go back, then you start them again, and it's really difficult, isn't it? So I think having that like overarching goal, like Charlie was talking about, and one that is really important to you in your life, like playing with your kids, being there for your family, whatever it is, something that's really important to you, and then choosing to have that healthier lifestyle when you can, is really important to help you reach that goal and be able to be there and be around those people. It's really interesting, isn't it? It makes you think about ways of changing your mindset, doesn't it?
Yeah, because I think quite a lot of the time, if you join sort of slimming clubs and things like that, it's always like, oh, reach a goal weight. But then what happens then? I think Charlie said this is lifestyle, and that means life, so it's kind of something that you want to make changes for the rest of your life, and therefore you need to be sure that it's something that you can also enjoy for the rest of your life. I mean, imagine if we would just eat, I don't know, kale. You might be able to eat kale for a day, maybe for a week, but would you be able to do it for the rest of your life? Probably not.
That's it, isn't it? And it's so important, isn't it, to have that balance as well, isn't it? And work towards your goals, have that balance as well, when you can, when it's the right time for you.
Yeah.
And not to get discouraged when you can't do those things to 100%, and just to keep having that resilience to keep coming back, because that's your goal, is that lifestyle, as opposed to right, I'm going to drop this many pounds, or I'm going to be able to meditate for this long, or whatever, and you beat yourself up into being able to get to these sort of short-term things that ultimately what Charlie was talking about, wasn't it, is that actually that sort of behavior change, isn't it, and that overarching lifestyle.
Yeah. And I think like the most important thing that I took away from is that you don't need a whole life overhaul at once, just find one thing. So we mentioned the lady wanted to, or that person who took part in Miles for MS, just walking with her walker in the supermarket for a mile. or maybe it is taking up mindfulness. This is something that I'm thinking that I want to do during next month, alongside of Miles for MS. I am taking part in Miles for MS by proxy, because my 9-year-old son, he is doing it again. And I also bring him back to what Charlie was saying about social connections. There's like nothing that I enjoy more than running with my son, because we have so much fun at the going. He even wrote a song about running. I might let that song play us out at the end of the episode today. But I just think, it's not just about exercise, or you need to do that and you need to do that. It's more about what you can do. And then at the end of the day, when you finish something, instead of just thinking, oh, I didn't do that, I didn't reach my step goal today, it's like, well, maybe I cooked a healthy meal and maybe that was a good thing. Or maybe I saw a friend today and I really enjoyed myself. The sort of, I read somewhere, it's like, not ignoring the negative, but focus on the positive. And I think that's sort of part of making those small steps and changes.
Yeah, definitely. And I love what you're saying there about the social connection. And, Stephen was talking about there, the MS community, how you can get involved with Mars for MS, and how he, when he was first doing it, how he felt that sort of sense of connection with people, with other people, who felt were in a similar position to what he was in. And you don't have to be going out and seeing people, you can be sharing your journey for Mars for MS online and connecting with people in that way too. So yeah, so important. And I've definitely, come away from this feeling a little bit more inspired. I know that no one out there is doing all of these things all the time, are they? No one out there is doing like living the really really healthy diet, just eating kale, as you say, exercising all day every day, also finding time to meditate, mindfulness, sleep well, and just live in that complete way of health, are they? Like that can't exist. And also, look after the kids, go to work, look after your parent, whatever else you need to do. Like it can't happen, surely.
And get a good night's sleep in on all that as well. There's only so many hours in the day.
How many hours? Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, as I say, I'm definitely inspired just to make those small changes. Just make a small change, and it could have those big impacts. So if you do want to get involved in Mars for MS, any challenge that you like, as Stephen was saying, something to get you moving this summer. And it can be completely your way. So it can be wheel, walk, scoot, run, cycle, e-bike, swim, cross training, anything goes. It really is for everybody. You get to say how far you want to go. You get to set your own challenge. You're in charge of this. So just make sure the main thing is that you have fun, enjoy your achievements, and if you want to, you can share them with others. And just doing that, not only might you also get those benefits of connection and healthy lifestyle, but also you'll be making a huge difference to people living with MS. So you can go ahead and sign up. We'll pop the link in the show notes, but also it's mstrust.org.uk/miles.
And there is a Facebook group set up specially for it as well, which we will share in the show notes as well. So then you can, what we were talking a little bit about, that kind of keeping yourself accountable is a good way of maybe motivating yourself. But you know what? You don't even have to move if you don't want. Last year, our workmate Simon in the Inquirer line, he listened to 31 Miles Davis albums, say Miles for MS. He took it a little bit in a different direction, and he reviewed them, all these albums. Or maybe you could set a sleep challenge. I don't know, because you can just be as creative as you want to. And if you're already taking part, give us a shout and tell us what you're doing or planning on doing. We'd love to hear from you.
If you also want to get in touch with us, if you've got any questions about MS, be they about brain health, exercise, or anything else, symptoms, treatments, you name it, you can call our helpline, and that's available Monday to Friday apart from UK bank holidays. The hours are 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Outside of those hours, you can leave us a message and we'll get back to you. So give us a call. That's 0800 032 3839.
Also find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And tag us. Hashtag Miles4MS if you're doing the challenge, or just if you want to talk about the podcast, do let us know as well. We'd love to hear from you and see what you're thinking of it. And then if you have any tips for any future episodes or anything like that. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcast, and Amazon Music. And like I said, leave us a review maybe. I said I would play my son's song. I can do this because I'm editing the podcast, so I'm going to go mad with power and let him sing us out. But I want to say thank you to Anne Chapman Audio for the music that normally plays us out on the podcast. Bye.
Bye.
Just to be gentle rhymer. This is Huxley's running song.
Fun, running with my mum, on my every run, wiggling my bum, having lots of fun, running with my mum, thinking of a bun, and missing it in my tum. It started with a park run, realising it was fun, every mile no longer a pain, happy thoughts in my brain, skipping in a pool of mud, watch out, don't make a fud, make a fud, make a fud, make a fud. Fud! Now for your combination, I am running across the nation, rolling some peace across, raising money for the endless trust, 100,000 with a diagnosis, life with multiple sclerosis.